Hi, I'm Naomi from Bellarine Catchment Network. We're an incorporated not-for-profit environmental organisation based on the Bellarine Peninsula here in Victoria, and I'm here to talk about the Inclusive Volunteering Guide. In this short video, I'll take you through the Inclusive Volunteering Guide, how we developed it, some key learnings from each stakeholder group, and how you can implement these actions into your everyday volunteering, from a weeding activity, being a committee member, and other events. So this is the Inclusive Volunteering Guide, a practical resource for inclusive environmental volunteering. We would like to thank proud Wadawurrung man Billy J. O'Toole for providing the artwork on the front cover, and that's seen on the footer of each page. It's important to note that this contents page includes live links, so if you do need to navigate to other sections of the document quickly, you can do so here. This page features an introduction to Bellarine Catchment Network, who we are and what we do. We'd also like to thank the contributors to this document. Without their help, we would not have been able to produce such a detailed and varied guide, and that includes the Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Aboriginal Corporation, Cultura, Geelong Rainbow, and GenU. Part 1 is an introduction to the guide, how it came about and why. It details the purpose of this document, including background information and the practical ways that it can be inclusive. And we also have a section here about why inclusive volunteering. That might seem like a very simple question, but it's really important to actually state that we want everybody to volunteer, and there are barriers in place that we have to try and break down. It also states that it's simply the right thing to do. We also have a section down here which talks about how we need to create safe spaces and how for some, unconscious bias, which we all have, may be a reason why they are showing discriminatory behaviours and how this can actually come about. We have a page here that gives tips on dealing with discrimination in the case where you might have a volunteer that is making harmful comments to someone else or about a group of people. Some tips we have here include maybe developing a code of conduct to set boundaries and guidelines about behaviour that you expect. We also suggest that training is an option so that at least people understand the backgrounds of these communities, and some tips on managing conflict. But if you do need legal advice or further support, we suggest getting into contact with agencies such as Volunteering Victoria or Justice Connect. Part 2 dives straight into these communities, starting with the Wadawurrung and First Nations peoples. We outline and define what a registered Aboriginal party is, or a RAP, and have links that help you identify the local RAP in your area. This page is about the Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Aboriginal Corporation and is derived entirely from their own website with correct approvals, and further resources including the Voice to Parliament and YouTube links with language. The Being Inclusive Practical Actions section outlines really practical ways that you can be inclusive. This is things like educating yourself, actually making contact with organisations like Wadawurrung and other First Nations groups so that you can be actively collaborative. Some other tips include how to do an appropriate acknowledgement of country and what the difference of a welcome and an acknowledgement is. We then outline some great tips on what you can do when you're planning and facilitating a volunteering opportunity. This includes when you're promoting it, include the country that you are on. For example, you could say that we're meeting at Clifton Springs on Wadawurrung Country. You could include flags, so the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flag on your signature, on your promotion posters, on social media posts. This lets people know that it's a safe cultural space. Another tip is actually using approved Wadawurrung language. The Wadawurrung have a language app that is available on iPhones and tells you things like what take care is, which is gobara. You could use these when you're with volunteers to promote the use of Wadawurrung language. Here we have some examples of what we're talking about. So a social media flyer that includes Wadawurrung Country in the location, and also this poster here that includes the flags to show that it is a very safe space for everyone. Part 3 looks at CALLED communities, which is an acronym that stands for Culturally and Linguistically Diverse People and is used as a broad term to describe the multicultural community. This section introduces the idea of culture and how it is quite hard to define and identify this, and why it's important to try and understand different cultures. We introduce the topic of cultural humility, which is a way to be truly inclusive where you self-critique and learn from each other. We provide information about Cultura, who operate out of Geelong and Colac, and connect and empower and support the COLD community. The Being Inclusive Practical Actions section of this chapter talk about things like educating yourself about the barriers that the COLD community might face to volunteering. This talks about language, the cultural shift and shock, and how important it is that we understand these barriers when we are designing our volunteering opportunities. Of course, it talks about being collaborative and making that step towards working with agencies like Cultura to design truly inclusive volunteering opportunities. In the planning and facilitating volunteering section, we talk about the importance of designing inclusive. So looking at those barriers, learning about them, really thinking about your specific opportunity and making sure that you are trying to break down those barriers where possible. We have a promoting volunteering section, which provides examples of how you can make your promotions more accessible to the COLD community. This includes the language that you use to describe volunteering and to show the value of it, and maybe thinking a little bit differently about that. It talks about registrations and how some things may seem alarming to the COLD community, and how you can make a space so that people can ask for support. We have a section on social media which includes tips such as using clear and concise language, and a really useful tool to check how your language is interpreted by different ages and understandings of English. Finally, we have a section on running inclusive events on the day itself. So this might be providing flexible or informal volunteering opportunities for some people to do, making sure that you're not making assumptions about people and their culture based on how they look, and even a suggestion that you learn some basic greetings in other languages. And we have a really excellent guide on Appendix 2 that can be used for this. Part 4 talks about people with disabilities and what this actually means, what types of disabilities people might have, and we even introduce the idea of the social model of disability, which is looking at the person, not their impairment. We talk about the power of language and how some people might prefer person-first language, so saying things like people with a disability, not a disabled person. We also outline some of the support agencies that are working to support people with disabilities, including the NDIS and GenU. We've also included some excellent documents, website and guides to help you with your further learning. The Being Inclusive Practical Actions section in this chapter again talks about the importance of being collaborative and actually working with organisations like GenU. In the Planning and Facilitating Volunteering section, again we talk about designing inclusive and thinking about things like where your volunteering is happening. Does it have accessible parking and appropriate toilet options? What's the terrain like? Are your volunteer coordinators briefed about how they can support people with disabilities? The Promoting Volunteering section talks about the use of diverse images of people so that when people see your social media post or your poster, they see themselves. There's also a tip about being clear about your volunteering activity and not assuming that everybody knows what's going to happen. The social media section describes the benefit of using alternative text on social media so that people with screen readers can actually understand the imagery that you're using. And there's a great example of that below. We also have a section on Easy Read, which is a way to write that is clear and easy for everybody to understand. There's some really great resources that you can use to look at examples and understand how you can write in that way. Part 5 looks at people who are in the LGBTIQA+ community. We start this chapter off defining what all parts of this acronym mean. We also have really clear definitions on what we mean when we say sex, gender, cisgender and pronouns so that everyone understands the language used in this chapter. We have a section on visibility and how important this is for the LGBTIQA+ community, including the use of the rainbow flag or the progressive pride flag, which features below. We introduce who Geelong Rainbow are and what kind of work that they do in the Geelong community. And we also have some excellent links to help you understand more about Geelong Rainbow and some other great organisations in Victoria. In the Being Inclusive Practical Actions section in this chapter, we talk about the importance of being collaborative with organisations like Geelong Rainbow and some of the events that they might run throughout the year. In the Planning and Facilitating Volunteering section, again we talk about how important it is to design inclusive volunteering opportunities. Some really simple tips we have about this are thinking about, are we assigning volunteering roles to genders based on what we perceive? Are we using language in policies or documentation that refers to genders? In the Promoting Volunteering section, we give tips on how to make sure that your promotions are inclusive for everyone. This might include using language that isn't specific to genders. It could just be volunteers or people. In the social media section, we have tips such as, again, using diverse images of people so that they can see themselves reflected in your social media posts. We also suggest using gender-neutral language and colours on your social media posts or posters so that everybody feels welcome. When running events, some of the tips that we suggest include displaying visuals such as the progressive pride flag. And you could do that with the poster that's featured below or wearing badges. Use pronouns for yourself. So you might introduce yourself as, "Hi, I'm Naomi. My pronouns are she, her." This shows that we're comfortable talking about pronouns and that people are welcome to use their own. So those are the main chapters, and we finish the guide by talking about intersectionality, which is a concept where people have multiple systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So they may have a disability and may be in the LGBTIQA+ community. It's really important to understand this concept because people don't exist in silos as we have described, and we only do so in this guide for ease of understanding. One of the most important parts of this guide is a page and a checklist that brings all of the learnings together. So it goes through the different parts of designing inclusive volunteering, from planning to facilitating events, and it brings every single tip together in a really easy format. So if you don't have time to read the whole thing, take these 2 pages and use that as your guide. Finally, we have some really useful appendices that were designed and created by our partners. To learn more about this topic and to identify where we acquired some of our information, we have a references page with links to the documents and websites online.